Thank you very much for very informative film. And I would like to invite two speakers to come on stage, please. I'm sure this is a very good case study for public media, and of course not only for the public media but for media industry in general, how to survive with sentiment of technological change, the total climate of political change, and then there is opportunity for referendum. Thank you very much for the film. Very eye-opener and very comprehensive argument and self-critical as well. So panel of discussion will take on for about 40 minutes, and then I'll open up the floor for question and answer for about 20 minutes. I'm sure many of you would like to know behind the scene in producing this Under Pressure documentary. And panelist of this panel is Mr. Hansrudi Shok. Sorry for my pronunciation.
Perfect pronunciation. Thank you.
He has extensive experience in journalism for more than 30 years, and he's been head of program at SBC, Swiss Broadcasting Corporation. He's now input treasurer and director of programs. Mr. Christian Porter, editorial manager of Public Media Alliance, and he has extensive knowledge about public media globally. Congratulations for the result of the referendum. That means yes, no for no Bilag.
Yes,
Can you just explain this a bit?
That's a bit complicated. Yes, because in Switzerland we have a direct democracy, so we have referendums about 4 or 5 times a year. People basically can vote about anything. So if I have the idea to have, let's say, let's paint all the traffic lights green, and I get 100,000 signatures for that, the Swiss people will vote, and if the vote is yes, it's going to be in the constitution. It's always on a constitutional level. So that makes, in most of the things, it makes sense. In some areas, it's a bit difficult to go directly on the constitutional level. So here it was actually not the question whether you want to abolish the broadcasting system, but whether you still want to pay license fees. The BILAG is the company, a private company that collects the license fees. So you have to say no to the referendum to say yes to SBC, which is complicated and which has been complicated for the Swiss people as well. And that's very often a political trick to name a referendum in a way that people get confused and you might get more votes out of it.
And to see things in context, because my understanding before I watched the film was this was shown before referendum, but actually it's not.
No, we weren't allowed to do anything in this way before the referendum. In fact, we were disallowed to show like normal image trailers and all that stuff. We were not allowed to do that anymore. We did a lot of reporting, but the reporting was, as it was mentioned in the film, always of the same amount of seconds for pro and contra. So this film was produced, we had the idea quite close to the referendum, and then it was produced and shown 4 days after the referendum. So production time was about 2 months.
So it was shown after referendum was to remain SBC. No Bilag. Yes to no Bilag. To reject no Bilag. Yes.
Yeah.
I have to think.
And if we would have lost, we still could have shown it, because we would have had the money to broadcast for another 6 months or something, but then we would have had to shut down the whole company. It's 6,000 people in the whole of Switzerland, and it's an institution in the sense of we've been around for 70 years. We belong to the core of the Swiss sort of culture and society. So it would have been really a big move for Switzerland to get rid of that.
Do you feel relieved at the moment, right now?
Yeah, I mean, it was for all the people working at SPC. I mean, it was really difficult of the month leading up to the referendum because the first polls were against us. In the sort of the commentaries on social media, where most of them were, is it me? Most of them were really harsh against us. So people started to really be afraid. So they came in every day, did their jobs, trying to be impartial about this topic. But in the end, they've been really in fear of losing their job. So on the day itself, everybody was very relieved and was in the mood for celebrating. But at the same time, we announced this 100 million cutback, which was very important politically as a signal, but for the people working for us, it was awful. Because it was like, yes, I saved my job, oh no, maybe it's gone anyway. So this emotional sort of up and down on the same day, it's difficult, and we still have lots of discussion about that.
It means laying off some positions.
Yeah, we will be laying off a couple of hundred people.
Yes. Christian, watching this, what do you have in mind as an expert in public media in many countries around the world? What's the implications toward public media?
For me, I think it highlights the range of challenges public media have in trying to drum up support, get people to understand what they really do, what they're worth. Essentially what we're doing here this last couple of days, getting people to understand getting the public to understand what society could be like without a public broadcaster, especially in democratic societies. And I think you said yesterday, Hans-Rudi, you said about how there are parts of the world that are progressing towards democracy, making big leaps. I know that here, obviously, we've got the Thai PBS are preparing for the general election next year, whereas in parts of Europe, we're having one of the key pillars of democracy being eroded, which is public broadcasters being essentially dismantled in certain parts of Europe. We've had in Poland, in the last couple of years, we've had government interference suddenly in the public broadcaster there, which has resulted in job losses and state control of it. Similar is happening in Hungary, where there's a lot of state capture of media, independent media outlets more generally. And in Denmark, for example, there's been a government push to turn Denmark's, DR is the name of the Danish public broadcaster. They have had a government agenda to remove the license fee and replace it with a general taxation for the public broadcaster. But that's also meant a 20% cut over the next few years, which has resulted in up to 400 job losses. So we're seeing one of what I consider the key pillars of democracy being taken away. But I think there's a role for those inside public broadcaster those who are working for public broadcaster to support it. We've seen in Spain recently a campaign by staff at the public broadcaster there to try and have try and reform how the broadcaster works. And I think internally, I think that's a really good check on how public broadcasters are run and what they're worth. And I think even though people weren't allowed to campaign who worked internally at the Swiss public broadcaster, I think the passions there sort of filtered out into society, and you could see what would happen if it was to leave.
I think actually it was really tough, but at the same time it was very healthy for us to have this whole discussion, because I truly think we got, over the last decades, we got a little off path, in the sense of with all these new stations, we got in our minds somehow commercially thinking. Because traditionally we've been the biggest, we wanted to stay the biggest, no matter what happens. Because we used to be very important, we wanted to stay important no matter what's happened. And actually, the society has changed in a way that we didn't really anticipate. We were, I completely agree with the message of the film. We were, for a long time, quite arrogant, and it took us some time to learn about that. So it's very often, for me, it was very important that we made a film that is not just about, oh, there's far-right politicians and they're the bad guys and they come and they want to abolish us, the good guys. It's far more complicated than that, and we have our share of things we didn't do right. So actually, for us, it was, I wouldn't say one of the best things that could happen, but the discussion, the quality of the discussions, what are we doing? What is the core of public broadcasting? What is our mission? Why do we do this kind of programs and not other kind of programs? The quality, I've been working for the SBC now for 25 years or something. The quality of the discussion, I have never experienced it that good as in the last sort of year or so. So there's really something for us to take out of that experience and actually just make better programs. Be more differentiated, be more public.
For you, is it the hardest examination toward SBC for the past 70 years of the organization as the public media of Switzerland?
Yeah, somehow it was. And I apologize for that. Parts of the film were really aimed at the Swiss audience, so it must have been very difficult and maybe a bit tiring to follow all these different actors and all that. But there was one section in it which showed the Hofer Club in the 70s. The 70s saw a first far-right surge in Switzerland. Of everything was very anti-communist, and everybody that ask a critical question was a communist for the establishment. So at that time, criticism was very, very big, and we had lots of threats, lots of death threats and stuff like that. But politically, at this time, there was no alternative, because there was no social media, there was just the old press. And nowadays there's an alternative, so the politicians can say, you know what, we don't care about SBC anymore.
Changing the media landscape nowadays, Christian, with technological change, blossoming of social media, more choices for audience, do you see as the tougher jobs for public media to remain, especially under this circumstance with changing atmosphere of politics at the same time?
As I said yesterday, I think the role of public media is just as it ever was, is to hold that sort of, the difficult politics, politicians, different ideologies to account, to offer a level playing field, to offer a platform for sensible discussion. I think in digital media environments, the values of public media need to continue, but they need to be adapted. There needs to be innovation. There needs to be, they need to be more there than ever before. And I think public broadcasters need to welcome critical discourse from their audiences. They need to, and I think the digital landscape allows for that. I think that, in a way, public broadcasters can be more transparent than ever before now. And I think the referendum in Switzerland, the debate that happened online, contributed to how SBC is then having to reevaluate itself. Maybe if that happened 20 years ago, maybe there wouldn't be such a diverse conversation. I'm not sure, perhaps.
Yeah, possibly not, but I think in the end it's the mixture of political climate in Europe. Media change. There's a radical disruption going on. You all know that, but it's really tough on the private media. It's not so tough on public media because we get excuse me part of the funds from license fees. So one of the really important things that we haven't been aware of is that many journalistic friends hate us. And they don't hate us because I'm friends with many of them. I started out in private media. But they say, you're still rich, you still have the money, whenever there is a press conference, you're always first. You always have the arrogance. You got the sports rights. You got this. You got this. You got this. You always have this arrogance. So after many years of that, they really hoped not that we lose, but that we really get in trouble, just to have a little payback. And having the whole private press in a country and all the private media constantly over years writing against you, and I'm sure a little bit of that is also in Thailand because you get government money. Having all this not hate stuff, but very sort of stuff against you, and we always felt, oh, it's below us to counter argue and stuff like that. In the end, in the population, they start to believe, oh yes, they're too big. Oh yes, they spoil the money. Oh yes, they're this and that, this and that. So things that are just sort of perceptions get into common knowledge, and then it's very, very difficult to win a vote on that base.
The atmosphere sounds very familiar, but perhaps not to that extreme extent yet about the Thai PBS. But of course, I'm sure with the public media existence, the feeling about public media must have been the same, especially when you compare with the sentiment among commercial media who haven't got the same financial support from the government or from governmental organization. In terms of budgeting, Christian, what do you reckon for the public media to adjust or to adapt themselves in this environment, which perhaps hostile?
I think public media need to fight harder than ever to try and retain that sort of public fee, the license fee, or whether it's a tax. The money has to come from the public for it to be, in our opinion, for it to be genuinely public. I think there are other models out there. So, for example, the Guardian newspaper in the UK has a few years ago initiated a campaign to raise money from their readers to pay for them, which is I know they're not public media, but as an independent outlet was a risky move. They realized that advertisement was, there was less advertising money, there was, and therefore less money to fund them. But then, I think it was last week, they realized that they announced that 1 million people around the world, not just in the UK, donate and contribute to their funds. Now, I've heard some arguments that public media could then start to have that sort of styled funding, but I don't think it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't allow the broad spectrum, it wouldn't allow the representation. What public funding, what license fees, for example, mean is that ideally there would be a universal representation. You're meant to represent the diverse public that pay for you. I think in the digital age, there's room and there is opportunity for commercial funding, but there has to be clear lines. There has to be a limit at which that sort of funding influences what the broadcaster's output, whether that changes the level of impartiality and objectivity that broadcaster has. And then there's other examples like in the US where they have philanthropic funding. That's tenuous, and is it sustainable? And some critics argue that that means the broadcasters then create content that only attracts those who are able to pay for it. So I think public broadcasters, public media have to stick with their guns when it comes to public funding and have to defend themselves more than ever.
You told us from the very beginning that internal communications among the staff of public media is really crucial. Do you mean internal communication within organization, or having campaign for outsider, for the whole society to understand what the public media has been doing?
I think both. I think there's as we were talking about earlier, there's a disconnect between staff and sometimes management at public broadcasters. I think, as Judy said yesterday, there's a real family at public media organisations. There's a real, the idea that staff want to work there because there's that family feel. You're working towards public values, something that's really vital for democracy. So if that's the case, then staff should be able to hold the broadcaster themselves to account, and also be part of, saying to the public, this is what we do. So the case of Spain, the example I gave earlier, staff there went on strike because they wanted to try and reform how the management worked and how the management were brought into power in Spain. And actually the campaign there raised awareness with the public as to the value of public broadcasting and the value of independent public media. Mm-hmm. So that attempt to reform internally actually led to greater awareness of the value of public broadcasting. So I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, there's a big gap between how programs are perceived and how the institution is perceived. So in Switzerland, we are really successful with many of our programs, so people really love it. So part of the argument of the people against us was, oh, you can abolish the license fee, but you're going to still have your favorite show somehow, sort of. Not really explaining how, but somehow you're still going to get it, because they knew if they tell the people you're going to lose that, people will say, no, you're stupid, I still want my Undertaker fictional drama show or whatever.
You mean presumably people just presume that they will carry on watching those high quality programs?
Yeah, there was some time that a couple of months in the whole election, in the whole vote referendum debate, that there was really an argument that everything you really love will still be there. Somebody will find a way how to finance it. Very vague, very cloudy. So that's why we always said, we're gonna file for bankruptcy. There's no plan B. If you say yes to no bilog, we're gonna end the company in 6 months, because we just can't. I mean, 1.3 billion in the small market. There's no way. Even if you're very successful, even with 100% market share, there's not enough marketing and advertisement money in the market to sustain that all. So the argument was never whether our programs are good or strong. I mean, some of them are debated, but most of them are really accepted. The argument was, as an institution, they're too big, they're too fat, and so on and so on. And actually, part of that is true, because that's all over Europe with the big ones. In Germany, the ARD, ZDF, and so on and so on. I mean, they have a couple of billion euros as their budgets, and they have huge administrations, they have huge, and there's a privilege there. So we have to work on the awareness that we put every Swiss franc, every license fee franc into the program, and not into an administration, not into the institution. And at the same time, for people working for us, we have to explain them and teach them not to feel as privileged as they did feel. And that's one part of the big gap between management and the workforce, is we're actually taking away privileges. We're telling them to behave more normal, to let other people have a first go at interviews. It's lots of small things in daily life that make the perception that you're arrogant, or form the perception that you're just one of the pack. And I think we really have to work on that. And for the people, it's difficult to accept that.
Has it become policy that the management shouldn't drive Porsche after or during referendum?
Actually, long before that, actually the only one entitled to a car, to just a car, no driver and not a Porsche at all, is the Director General. And it was very wise of him. The one before him, you saw in the movie, Roger Devek, he drove a Harley, not a car, but a Harley, which is almost as bad as a Porsche, because it's very expensive. And I mean, we've been cutting back on administration and all that for many years now, but it's difficult to relate that to the people. And yes, we have too many stations, but if you start the discussions about getting rid of 1 or 2 radio stations, the people that love that station will write you lots of angry letters and say, no, you can't do that, and so on and so on. So it's really hard to reduce sort of.
Even though you have facial.
Yeah. Yeah.
For communications with the public, have you done your job regularly before the referendum this time in March this year? Previously, did SBC try to communicate with the public what you have done on the daily basis, not on daily, on regular basis?
It's a very good question. We have improved. We started doing this Hello SRF thing I showed yesterday. We started to do that in 2015, which was about 10 years too late, actually. I do lots of road shows. So if I get into villages and sit on a podium like that and have some local populist politician ask me nasty questions. And I think that's very important. The people have to get a feel on the representation of the SPC. The people are entitled to ask directly, why do you do this like that? Why do you do this? We have these call-in shows. I think this kind of dialogue is absolutely crucial and will be even more crucial in the future. We have to be transparent. We have to be very open to any kind of question.
In terms of population, I think that would be interesting. Do you have the figure how many % of the young generation vote to reject no bill in this referendum?
Yeah, actually that was for me personally, it was the thing that made me really happy. That actually the group of the 18 to 25-year-olds, the so-called many generation names, but you could call it Generation Netflix as well. We struggle, as everybody does, to reach them with our programs, but it was this group that voted the most for us. 75% of the 18 to 25 years old said, no, we don't. Yes, we don't want the referendum. Yes, we want public broadcasting. And their argument was, it's about solidarity. It's about keeping the language regions and the country together. And we are not for this libertarian thing that everything should be paid for just if you need it, because hospitals, schools, streets, and so on don't work that way. And for them, public broadcasting was like essential for democracy in Switzerland. So we were really happy about that.
It's quite encouraging, isn't it, Christian, to know that young generation nearly vote to reject no bill referendum. It means they really want to have public media, so it means they see value of it in their daily life.
Yeah, I think it's just you don't want a referendum every time you want to, poll the audience to see if they actually want public media. I think it's really reassuring. I think it's widely a misconception about young audiences. I think, as I keep saying, they understand what public media is when they're told it, and I think it needs to be less abstract. We need to, and I keep saying this, we need to just, public broadcasters need to make sure that everyone knows what they're about. Then, what happens when it goes. And I think, as with anything like a public broadcaster, it's better to have people question it, but want to keep it and then reform it, than have the option to actually get rid of it. Because once it's gone, and in the case of Switzerland, it's not coming back.
Yeah.
There's an amazing result.
I'm just wondering whether Brexit outcome
Let's not talk about Brexit.
has influence over this.
Actually, our two biggest helpers were the UK with the Brexit, because that was really a shock for people in Switzerland, because this thing with protest votes, that you actually say yes to something you don't really want, but you want to give somebody a kick with your vote. And the other thing that helped was Donald Trump. I did send him a letter to thank him for this kind of support. No. people in Switzerland, all over Europe, realize that this simple thing of, say no, there will be enough people that say the other thing and then it will turn out well. They really had the example of that doesn't work anymore. It's always a danger that it moves into the wrong direction.
Yeah.
But I'm unhappy about Brexit anyway, because it's going to be a disaster for the UK. But
It's like waking up
other
moment.
discussion. Yeah.
We've talked about this, and I have the same sentiment.
Not quite uplifting at the moment.
I think Brexit. There's many things I could say about that. I think it shows public broadcasters are critical to informed debate. I think if there's not an informed debate, bad things can happen. I think I don't even want to talk about Brexit. That's really mean.
Yeah.
No, but the question here is not Brexit, but it's the role of the public broadcaster. And I followed that quite closely. And I have to say the BBC is part of the problem there, because they didn't take it seriously for a very long time. And one of the lessons to be learned is, as a public broadcaster, it's your responsibility to take even crazy political ideas, or ideas that sound crazy at the beginning, to take them seriously and do lots of reporting and do impartial reporting. It's so important that we don't get out there and say, be for this or be for that. It's important to make the basics lay out so people can decide for themselves. That's our role.
Yes. What's your take, Christian?
And understand what people's issues are. When you have a referendum, when you have a choice of two things, you know, with any vote in a democracy, it's an opportunity for people to voice concerns based on if they vote differently to usual, for example. In the case of in the case of the referendum in Switzerland, I'm sure that someone who might have a concern of how public broadcasting is might have voted to get rid of the license fee, but would have then regretted it once it went, when you have an option of two, there needs to be a very informed and very impartial debate for there to be a good outcome to that. So you can't have a sort of rebel vote, if you like, when there's an option of two, because it will be one or the other. So I think you're right. I think the way that the referendum worked out in Switzerland was an example of when people are informed about what the options are. And it's a great example in Europe right now, actually, of a successful
so that
positive
means
outcome.
the public media have to work quite hard.
And it's been a big criticism of the BBC of coverage of Brexit at the time, whether it was taken seriously, whether people underestimated what people in the country actually thought. I think it gives the BBC a good opportunity to reflect and how they would then go about reporting on a referendum or the next general election. So.
Back to the issue of SBC, to have in-house checking. What's the balance of structure between management and staff, like in the newsroom, programming, once they know that there would be referendum? Does it strengthen people to work in unity? But you also said it's also lead to self-examination.
Yeah.
Can you share this with us?
It's sort of, we did have this, all together we have the enemy, we have to fight this, so more people got out together for drinks after. That's one of the very simple things, but it's an indicator of, yes, they believed. At the same time, it was, as we were not allowed to get involved in the whole referendum thing officially, as the management had to be very careful on I mean, obviously we helped and got some of the third parties to think in the right direction and do stuff in the right. We in our free time, obviously, we were involved, but we couldn't talk about that. So the staff had the feeling that these lazy guys upstairs, they are not doing anything because they're always sort of, There's just third-party people doing something and they're not doing. And actually that was very difficult for everybody, because they said, why don't you go out there and be more aggressive about that? And we always said, we can't, because that would be counterproductive.
So has the referendum led to staff wanting reforms? Has that exposed internal issues at all, or in terms of transparency with management or anything like that?
No, those weren't the issues. It's more that we've been in the last couple of years, we've been changing a lot. We've been really changing a lot all the time. It was sort of a steady progression of lots of changes, lots of new organizations, lots of new programs, and so on and so on. And so people actually wanted, after the referendum, they wanted us to slow down. That was just to get a little bit of air, to breathe a little bit. And there was no time for that.
So it means by law, content of SBC cannot show any campaign to support organization at all.
Yeah.
So how did you work with the public, with the campaigners outside? Can you do it, or you cannot initiate that kind of campaign at all?
No, I mean, what sort of in the gray area, actually we weren't allowed anything. But in the gray area is, I mean, I have lots of friends, and other people in management have lots of friends out there working for marketing companies.
Like informal network.
Working an informal network. And obviously we worked on that informal network and helped build some committees that sort of did all the front side work for the campaign. So it was always in our free time. It's very important to say that. So it wasn't paid with license fee money. There was no SBC money involved, not 1 franc of SBC money. Actually, most of the money for the campaign came out of a crowdfunding thing initiated by citizens movement. And they got, that was, for me, that was the first indication that we're surely going to win, was that the crowdfunding brought together 1 million Swiss francs in, I think, 3 weeks. So,
that's a lot.
And that's a lot for something where people already pay a lot of license fee for. So I knew that there's more support out there that we had the impression at that time.
Yeah.
I suppose it brings up an interesting question as to the extent public broadcasters can actually defend themselves up against certain rhetoric, because obviously they need to be impartial, need to be objective. Does this go against the very idea of that, for them to defend themselves? That might be a really interesting thing for Thai PBS to see next year in the general election. I know some of the, just around the world, some of the language towards the media right now is, frankly, offensive. I mean, everywhere from in the UK, US, even to places like Tonga in the Pacific, where the Prime Minister there called the broadcaster the enemy of the people for reporting on doing its job. So, to what extent, and this is an open question, can public broadcasters actually defend themselves in that situation? I don't know if there's anyone here who can answer that, but it's just a...
Clearly we see that situation just recently in the press conference of President Trump with CNN and many media outlets.
Absolutely.
Yes. Now I would like to open up the floor for questions, comments that you would like to share with the two speakers, or what's the concern of the existence of the public media in Thai society or anywhere. Just feel free to share with us. Kun Thep Chaiค่ะ.
A few short questions for Hans Rudi. I mean, besides the threat of liquidation, what was the main message that you sent out to the public in Switzerland that resonated the most with them, that eventually led them to help you survive the ordeal? And the second question is whether the opponents of SBC can somewhere down the road reinitiate the no BELAC referendum again. And by the way, what kind of car do you drive?
I drive actually an electric car, a fully electric car, because I've got lots of solar panels on my house, so I drive it.
Tesla?
No, not that. I couldn't afford that. It's I don't know. I think it's a BMW, but it sounds more expensive than it is. Yeah, exactly. And I fully pay for it myself, and it's true. Not like in Waldenskate. The message, sort of the central message, or we had like a little house of messages, sort of like a fundament and the walls and the roof. And it was all built about the role we play for democracy. It wasn't so much about the content, because we knew that the people already like the content, so we don't have to argue with that. But we have to argue on the sort of on our role, on our public service role. So it was lots of the posters or the spots for cinema, because on TV there was no spots, not even commercial spots for against, because it's not allowed in Switzerland. So the spots were less diversity if you say no, even less democracy if you say no. It was very straightforward, very sort of fundamental messages getting out. Less solidarity in Switzerland with the 4 languages. Solidarity is really important, because that's how our country worked for the last couple of 100 years. So the messages were not, save public broadcasting, or public broadcasting is so important. There was no argument on that line, but the argument was much more fundamental about the values of public broadcasting. And the second question was, yes, that's a good question. Yes, they can sort of, they could have done it immediately after the vote. They could initiate anything they wanted. They didn't, because the outcome is really, really clear. 71.6% is huge. Mm-hmm. Usually in Switzerland it's sort of 50, 55, 56. What we expect is 2 things. There's a discussion now about new media law on the parliament level, and in that new media law we will lose quite a lot of things. And the second thing we expect is an initiative to sort of cut the license fee in half, which would, if that comes through, we would still exist, but it would be sort of very basic afterwards. But it usually takes quite a lot of time for the sort of the papers being put in and the actual referendum. So we are quite sure that we're going to live the next 4 years or something.
By law, every Swiss have to pay 400 francs, Swiss franc per year. That's by law. But do you decide to reduce by half?
No, it was this because that's a bit complicated. Basically, we changed the system so the license fee could be reduced with the same outcome of money in the end. So it's per household now, 1 fee per household, and before it was much more complicated what you paid. The reduction by half is is the dream of the People's Party, mm-hmm. that at least if they can't abolish it directly, they can try to like put us to a slow death with taking away more and more money. But at the moment, with that result in the back, they have to wait. They have to at least wait a little bit.
More questions?
Yeah.
Judy?
I just wanted to make a comment, to Christian's question, which is something that we touched on yesterday, which is the integrity of what it means to be a public service, public interest, public media broadcaster, which is that you have to look for the balance and objectivity, and you cannot be biased. And so it's usually required, at least with a lot of public broadcasters, that you basically cannot be advocating. So that's where you really can't be self-serving. So even when you're reporting, you have to report both sides, supposedly, okay? And so when we're talking about, government influence or how you get your funding, that is when it becomes critical, how you get your funding and the fact that that you retain your independence so that you can do what you need to do and that you become trustworthy, which is what, we kind of focused on yesterday, right? So that was just a comment I wanted to make about what it means to be a public media or public service broadcaster.
Thank you, Judy.
This doesn't have to be an English conversation. You can ask your questions in Thai as well. Put Basa Thai, nit noi. And we've got wonderful translators in the back doing an absolutely great job, so it would be nice. I would like to listen to them a little bit more, so maybe you could ask a question in Thai.
ค่ะถามภาษาไทยได้นะคะค่ะ Yes.
Yuko, you're not speaking Thai.
I do my best in Thai. So in Finland, in Finnish Broadcasting Company, we live quite peaceful life at the moment, and we are happy because we are funded by tax. And most of the people in Finland are happy because with tax, actually the price tag went down more than 50% because we got rid all of free riders who didn't pay the fee. But thinking about future survival of public media, I think we must be even better getting people understand and remember what they get with that tax money, and not just the prime time news or high quality drama, but as public media. Like with that money, we produce a news program in Sami language, which is one of the indigenous languages in Finland, and there are only 2,000 people who understand that language. But those 2,000 people, they get their own news, or the news for the people with hearing disabilities or hearing problem. And we should also try to remind people that, well, if I remember it right, when I went to work in Finnish Broadcasting Company, there were something like almost 6,000 people working, 2 TV channels, 3 radio channels, and that's it. Nowadays we are 3,000. We have 4 channels, 4 TV channels, and 8 radio channels and the whole online system, so that people remember and understand what they get with that money.
Thank you. That's very uplifting case from Finland. High security for public media. More questions?
Hello. I have a question for Hans Rudy. So yesterday there was a lot of, I think, talk about human resources and the necessity for raising talent. So after the referendum, do you think SBC is still perceived as an attractive workplace for young people and young creators? Do you think, did it have any sort of damage on the image as an ideal workplace? I mean, not just SBC, but public media in general. Do you think it still is perceived as an attractive place?
That's really interesting and a little bit complicated. Actually, we've never had as much people leaving us as we have now, because during the referendum discussions, everybody was thinking, okay, if we get abolished, what will I do with my life? So it triggered, for many people working for a long time for us, it triggered like this kind of thoughts about what could my future be? And then when we won the referendum, they said, oh, let's change anyway, because I've got this good idea, and so on and so on. So we have a lot of fluctuation at the moment. At the same time, we have many more interesting new digital natives that want to come and work for us. So there was kind of a mobilization in that younger age group that made them really interested in the values of public broadcasting. So we have, I'm also in charge of all the digital thing, and I have so many interesting people sort of on my table, their papers, because they say, yes, because of the referendum, we've been thinking about what is really needed. And I think that the private outfit I'm working for now has not got the right values. So I want to come to work for you, even if I earn less. People at the age of 25, 26, 27, that's really, really, really interesting and good news, actually.
I suppose as broadcasters innovate as well, they have to innovate to keep those younger audiences, to compete with others in the digital media landscape. That opens up opportunities to constantly look for the younger, more creative sort of stuff. I know that in Australia, SBS, for example, they look at ways to try and make more sort of new and dynamic content to attract more viewers and to engage news with new viewers, and that's attracting younger stuff. One great example is they've been experimenting with like sort of graphic novel animations to explain or to contextualize news stories about refugees, for example. And elsewhere, platforms like the CBC Kids platforms, or even BBC Three, which was a TV channel in the UK, which was taken online because it was thought to attract youth audiences, and that's been quite successful. And I suppose it's also meant that they've had to get a new sort of generation of innovators in to make sure that that's attractive to audiences.
Mm-hmm. To reform and to reshape organizations sounds really important in this digital age. Can you share with us after referendum, you said you have changed a lot, especially in terms of digitalizing. So what's the parallel between develop content for TV, radio, and then for digital? What's the structure right now?
There's two things. One thing is one of the most important of medias we own and were very important in the referendum is radio. In all the discussions, everybody always forgets about radio because it's like water coming out of the tap. It's very easy to produce. It's not that expensive. It's not that shiny, and so on and so on. Radio, in fact, is very, very, very important for public broadcasters and public service. So we should do more on the image of radio before referendums in other countries start. I really think that's important. The second thing is the digital shift is we are now in a situation where we start to produce lots of content for digital and then afterwards rebroadcast it. So we take more and more money out of the broadcasting, which is very expensive. TV is really expensive. We take that money out, we produce more content for the digital, and we put that content back on broadcast. And actually that brings some of the young audiences back to the broadcast because the storytelling does more appeal to them than it does. So it's like an inversion. 10 years ago it was sort of, let's put the broadcast content on digital, and now it's the other way around. Not for all the stuff, but more and more.
So it's the other way of convergence, bring digital back to broadcast. What's your reckon for public media to have guard for them, especially in Thailand, because we are having upcoming election? What do you like to recommend to us in terms of our role, of Thai PBS role as public broadcaster?
Be online, obviously. Make sure that internally you're collaborating with one another, the different departments, making sure that everyone is represented. a good example is looking at places like Sweden, who have just recently had a general election. The way that the Swedish broadcasters SVT and SR, the way they broke down their news teams and spread them throughout the country, trying to make it as representative as possible. Their content was, no matter how remote a population, that there was a journalist maybe there, or encouraging people to interact online. Another interesting thing that was very positive for them was to also complement debate shows and things like that with with entertainment sections, trying to attract audiences with an element of maybe they had a stand-up comedian on one debate show, which complemented the politics that was being talked about and made it more attractive to audiences. They had some of the highest audiences they've ever had for their content, and I recommend looking at public broadcasters like them. I think also just sticking to your guns as a public broadcaster, sticking to your values, sticking to being transparent, being accountable, and making sure that your reach, as I said in the beginning, is countrywide. And that means having people everywhere, journalists everywhere.
Yes, and more inclusive collaboration
More
with
inclusive,
citizen reporters.
Citizen reporters, I think the new citizen journalism portal is incredible, and I think that's a really good opportunity to get opinions from audiences and allowing them to actually contribute to debates from where they are. You know, if you are hosting debate shows, try and incorporate the public as much as possible. And I think that shows that you are, as an organisation, are democratic, and and they're the people you represent. So, I think that would be my advice.
Yes. Any recommend from you?
It's actually not really my place to recommend anything, but maybe one sort of more general thing about politics and elections. Never mind the ratings. Just don't care about them during that phase. We always do that because it's our job to put lots of programs out there, and maybe I don't know how you handle that. So for us, it was always do less shows, put less money into sort of big, shiny programs, but go to places where nobody else goes and talk to the people. Be present on the ground, because that makes people feel like you belong to them. And the big shiny show might have good ratings, but in the end, it's like private media, it's far, far away. And our job is to be close to the people.
Quality over quantity. I think making sure that the debate happens, and that's, as an organisation, you're the best, not first, which is what I think you do anyway. But another example would be Radio New Zealand, who had a roadshow for their election, where they sent out a reporter on a 2-week-long sort of journey around the whole of New Zealand, speaking to youth audiences and getting their opinion, and that was broadcast every night. So sort of things like that, bringing the public broadcaster to the people, was another good example of how they covered their general election.
That's in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Wow, that's long journey of our discussion from referendum in Switzerland, and we see how you have not quite campaign, but it's self-examination, self-critical, and then bring to the reform, bring to big change inside SBC, and then still communicate with the public that it still matter very much for the community, for the sense of solidarity for Switzerland. Congratulations again, and thank you very much for the view from two of you, and from Christian about your view of the public media and what we should carry on doing, and don't forget online platform that will be very much important for this upcoming election. Would you like to add something more?
Can I add some thanks? I would like to really thank the technicians. They've been doing such a great job. I've been to many, many conferences, and you really did a tremendous job. And the second group is the ladies and men. I don't see it really in the boxes behind there. The translators, you're world class. You're really world class. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for having us.
Thank you very much. Back office and supportive unit are really important for these big international events. So I'd like to thank all again, and thank you for Thai PBS, all the management to arrange this important international conference on the public media value in 21st century. Thank you again for two speakers. ขอบคุณค่ะ
And thank you all of you too as well for the nice session. Thanks all the audience for being here with us. And while the stage is being cleared, I request 3 of you to remain on stage. Yes.
As you may know, we have created an online evaluation form to collect all your feedback on the event. So at the end of your conference today, please kindly scan the QR code as you can see at the back of your name tag, and then fill the form. And it's available on both English and Thai language, so you can choose your preferable choice of language.
So now, may I invite, is Ms. Rumani here?
Ms. Rumani
Rumani
Meksopon,
Meksopon.
yes, member of the Thai PBS Board of Governors, to come on the stage and to present the token of appreciation. Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much.
thank you for the nice photos. You may now go back to your seats.
And for all the audience, please don't forget to scan the QR code and send back the feedback for our improvement. So we have now come to the end of the Thai PBS Public Media Conference and Mini Input. So please welcome Associate Professor Jumpon Rotkamdi, Thai PBS Chairman of the Board of Governors, to deliver the closing remarks.
Well, distinguished guests, participants, fellow media, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to speak to you today at the closing ceremony of Thai PBS Public Media Conference and Mini Input. This international conference takes place on the occasion of the Thai PBS 10th anniversary. It aims to create awareness and wider understanding of the role and value of public media globally in the face of digital disruption. Many questions were raised here. For example, what is the future of public television? Is anybody watching? Is public broadcasting in terminal decline? They are tough questions to answer alone. For the past 2 days, however, we have had meaningful moments when we review, exchange, and share experiences on how to overcome these struggles. According to former Prime Minister Anand Banjarachun and guest speakers, trust is what public media must maintain. independence and freedom from political interference are preconditions to enable us to carry out our works with integrity and effectiveness. We have an obligation to restore the faith of truth, being a good journalist, and produce a quality program against fake news, hate speech, and propaganda spreading via online venue. That's why public media must exist in democracy society. As global media consumption trends shift, fragmented audience, and demand rise for user-generated content, we are challenged to rethink about the boundary of public media. Young and elders generation are the prime audiences that public media should mainly concern and redesign a new dimension of public engagement in order to win their trust. How we, public media, can function as a bridge, a connection platform that brings about cohesion in the society, while at the same time giving respect to our beautiful differences. For Thai PBS, our 2021 mission is to generate our platforms, online, offline, and activities to become learning space for all. We believe in our role to enhance well-being for Thai people from all walks of life. We therefore create programs for lifelong learning and try very hard to do social service, especially in time of national crisis. We also invest in innovation for public accessibility, public participation, and personalized content. Uncertain situation in digital disruption era require more cooperation. We are all here today to reaffirm our strong collaboration in a spirit of optimism. Thai PBS would like to thank all of distinguished guests, participants, and co-hosts, namely Curtin Institute, Input, Chulalongkorn University, Thammasat University, and the National Institute of Development Administration, or NIDA, for their kind support during these 2 days. Next year, Thai PBS will also host the 2019 Input, or the International Public Television Screen Conference, in collaboration with Input and Curtin Institute. This event will intentionally provide an arena for public media film and documentary makers to showcase their works and ideas under the concept of storytelling in the public interest. You all are cordially invited and welcome again in May. Lastly, I would like to remind our public media fellow here that our success in overcoming the challenge that public media are now facing is not of our own merit, but the fruit of our innovation, imagination, and dedication belong to the people, namely the public, whose right to freedom of expression and access to reliable, independent, and useful information will not only be firmly guaranteed, but also given high value, creativity, and prioritization. Thank you once again for your participation. I wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Jumpon, for your beautiful conclusion. And we also thank you, all of you, for your kind participation in this conference. Last but not least, as Professor Jumpon said, that next year, Thai PBS, in cooperation with Goethe Institute and Input, will host Input 2019 from 6 to 10 of May next year. So for those who want to submit your documentary for selection, the call for submission is already open from now and until 15th of December this year. So you can also see the details from the leaflet on the registration desk.
So yeah, don't miss it. The area, the venue that we choose is along the river in Sheraton, really gorgeous. So please be there. Also, don't miss it because it's the first time that Thailand will be the host of such a huge event that combines and showcases all sorts of creative and inspiring content from all over the world. So we hope you enjoy the program as well as understand more content and in-depth issues and challenges about public media around the world that we're facing right now. And yeah, have a safe trip home and don't miss it. See you next year in Input 2019.